Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
Today we're going to talk some potatoes. Then I've got to run into town because we just got notification that some packages that we were expecting later came in today. There's 7 of them in at the gas station, and I can't leave that many hanging around for very long. I don't want the proprietor to be unhappy with us.
Yeah, no, he does us a favor by taking them, so we try and pick this stuff up as quickly as possible, especially if it's big. None of this is particularly big, but still.
So let's see, potatoes, and then you're going to talk about...
Our planting zone's bull.
Are they bull?
Depends on where you live.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that. You know, one of the things that we had come in today, and it's a really good thing that it came in, was we have our backup plan that we didn't know we needed for these seed potatoes.
Right.
Why don't you put one of those potatoes out, Irene?
Well, we got our seed potatoes the other day. We bought 2 different selections, and because we wanted to try a bunch of them. We haven't really grown anything other than what we could buy in the grocery store for several years. Multiple years ago, like 15 or something like that, we grew a bunch of different things, really enjoyed them, so we decided we'd do that again this year. And if you followed us in the past, you know we've had trouble with grubs. We know how to fix that now. So we were going to grow some in pots and some in the ground. Well, we got our seed potatoes this week, and most of them look great. They've got, you know, they're like this. They've got a couple little eyes, but nothing big. But
they all look great, but one of them looks greater than the others.
Yeah. We've got several that look like this. Now, okay, that means it's super fragile. I have to be super careful with it, and that's got to be planted pretty quickly. Anything that's got just a teeny bit of sprout on it, I can throw that in the fridge, and because we do not have a frost-free fridge, I don't have to worry about them dehydrating. You
know, there's a lot of ways to keep seed potatoes from really going crazy. We could put them outside in straw, cover it up with some soil.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is it's just easier for us to put them in our non-frost-free refrigerator for the couple of weeks that we need to let them hang out.
Now, in the past, when I have purchased seed potatoes, the vendor has asked me which shipping date I want, and I was able to designate a shipping date. And what I've always been told is, assuming you're not going to be planting them in a greenhouse or in some other covered area, 4 weeks before last date of frost. Well, our last date of frost is not until about the 16th of May.
Or a little later.
Or a little later, depending on the year. So it's a long way away. That's like away, you know. So I was not happy when I got this. And
we're looking at least 6 weeks until we would normally be able to put these seed potatoes out in the ground,
right,
which is an awfully long time to try to hold something that's sprouting that well.
Right. So we're going to go ahead and plant those in pots.
And fortunately, the pots came in.
Yeah, the pots came in today. They were actually not due until tomorrow, and even that was earlier than we initially expected them, so we're very happy with that. But I was doing some research on this because I'm like, how could this happen? This is a very conscientious supplier. How could this happen? Very simple. They're East Coast, and they relied on planting zones.
And the planting zones, in case you don't know, have a division between the eastern part of the United States and the western part of the United States.
In terms of efficacy, yes. They don't, I mean, they make it look like it's all cool. But did you realize that according to the planting zones, the temperature and growing circumstances in Seattle and Tucson are the same?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a little bit wacko. I think even if you haven't traveled extensively, you got to know that the difference between Seattle and Tucson is dramatic. So I found it's the National Gardening Association website here, and they have an interesting article on hardiness zone maps, and it explains how they work and the 10-degree differences between zones and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that they've recently changed the zone maps 5 degrees in terms of how they're working because we're getting warmer.
Well, you know, the thing is that we've always been judging our start days for everything for at least the past dozen years, because the first few years we lived here, we discovered that our last frost date as predicted by the grow zones didn't really work here.
Well, what you need is when you're figuring out when you want to plant, you don't look at your grow zones. I mean, you look at your zip code. And you take your zip code and you pop it into a first and last frost date system. And that's what you should use. Grow zones are a nice concept, but this is what the Gardening Association has to say. The USDA Map does a fine job of delineating the garden climates of the eastern half of North America. The area is comparatively flat, so mapping is mostly a matter of drawing lines approximately parallel to the Gulf Coast every 120 miles or so as you move north. And then they do tilt up as you get near the coast and stuff like that. But west of a line that is approximately north and South Dakota and down to Laredo, Texas, the USDA growth are almost totally worthless. Why? Precipitation and altitude.
Yeah, the big thing that hits us is altitude. And it's interesting because tomorrow I'll be going only 18 miles up the road to take care of a few things up there. And it's a huge difference in their growth.
10 to 15 degree difference at any given time, summer or winter. I mean, if it's really hot here, you driving up there is lovely because it'll be cooler. And sometimes we do in the summertime go up into the hills there just to get away.
And that's only 18 miles away from where we live.
So we suspect that our supplier this time used grow zones instead of zip codes. I'm actually going to write them a nice email because if you're not from west of the Mississippi, you're not going to know this, really.
Now, they're mostly an East Coast supplier. They do really, really great things for us on the seeds.
Right, and their fertilizer and all that kind of stuff has been absolutely spectacular. But they'll be the first people to admit that they're in a totally different grow zone than an awful lot of their clients. And they were mostly a regional supplier until recently. And then a lot of times they did a better job than some of the big boys did, and they've been able to grow dramatically. Well, that's awesome for them, but there are a few glitches in their system, and that's why I'll write them a nice note, because I'm not really ticked off. The majority of these are just fine. We'll be able to stick these in the fridge, and we'll be able to hold them. The ones that are real, the unfortunate thing was the first bag I opened was this one, and the first thing I see is this, and I'm like, well, I thought evil thoughts. So
that isn't exactly how that went down. I was in the office working on a video.
You heard grumble, grumble, grumble.
And a bunch of words not to be repeated.
Right. Because I was concerned that they were all like that. Now, when I popped the rest of the bags open, obviously they're not all like that. Most of them are just perfectly fine, and there will be no issue. But if I had no backup plan, this would be a problem. Now, we had originally planned to be planting some of these things in buckets anyway. What I will probably do is take a couple of them like this, and I'll still divide them the way I normally would. I'll probably chop this guy in half. It's got a little sprout on the back and this gigantic one on the front. And I may very well throw, I'll let them scab over so that they don't rot when you throw them in the dirt. And I may very well save this guy for later. I'm going to sort these more carefully, and anybody that's sprouting more is going to get used first. But we did have a plan because we were planning to do we were trying to start some pots, but one of the problems is even in the greenhouse at night right now, it's still getting down in the 20s. Yeah. So, which is not ideal. I'll obviously cover up the potato buckets and stuff like that and, do everything I can. But that's really not the way I would have preferred to do it. We have a plan, but it's sort of a pseudo plan.
Well, it's a real plan. It may not work, but it's a plan.
Well, we discovered this morning, because every morning I check the weather, and every night I check the weather, and several times in between.
And I check too, and it's interesting because we use exactly the same service, and Irene will get one answer.
We're sitting on separate sides of the sofa, and we will compare our phones. So it's the same model of phone, so it's the same app, everything, and we have different answers. The Intermountain West, which is where we live, means between the Colorado Rockies and the Sierras of California, is a very, very difficult to forecast area. You get huge differences in altitude, huge differences in rainfall, and that's why the grow maps are worthless there. Sunset Magazine does a Western Garden book, and they developed a completely separate from the USDA grow zone plan. And they took into exquisite detail the details of coastal humidity and altitudes and everything else. It was pretty complicated, but I actually own a couple of the books, and I haven't looked at them in years.
I think we're needing to do that again.
It's time to do that again. Yeah. See if they give us any insights for here.
The clock says I got to get going, but I did want to say one more thing. This year we bought a couple of sampler packs of potatoes. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind is when you get a sampler pack, unless it tells you that you're going to have a specific number of each one of the different varieties, you're going to get a sampler pack that's probably just based on weight, which means your big potatoes are going to dominate.
Somebody like this is a monster, and if I were trying to stretch this, I could probably get 6 plants out of that.
Which means in turn that the smaller potatoes are going to have fewer opportunities.
But somebody like this, I wouldn't cut him more than in half.
Now the other thing to keep in mind is that for years where a seed crop is not doing too well, you may get some potatoes that are a little on the shaggy side. You know, that's the breaks of gardening. That's the breaks of using natural products.
Right.
Some seed potatoes got over enthusiastic in the post.
Well, the problem is these shouldn't have been shipped this early. You know, I mean, because we're lucky here to have a fallback position. If I didn't have a greenhouse, I would just have to throw these in the fridge because we don't have a basement. We don't have any kind of a cool room. And this is the time of year when we get a huge amount of solar gain to the house every day.
Hey, you know, we got to stop talking.
That's true.
You know why?
Yeah.
I got to go to town.
Go to town because I need my pots so that we can.
Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications because we're going to be doing more crazy things.
Definitely. Tons going on. Tons going on. So until next time, bye.